From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Friday, September 5, 2025. Here come the ISIS brides and the political spin. Multiple agencies of the Commonwealth and state governments are making plans for the repatriation of Australian women and children stranded in the Middle East. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is trying to dodge the Australians' revelation. This will be the third cohort of wives and kids returning to Australia from the remnants of the so-called caliphate. Today, how police revealed what's really going on behind the attempts to manage the message.
Those reports are not accurate.
Liam Mendes is the Australian's journalist who broke this story on Tuesday. Liam, it must be quite startling to hear the Prime Minister denying something that you've had on page one of The Australian.
It was. It was an interesting choice of words from the Prime Minister. He said in very, very few words, essentially, that the story is not accurate. If it was completely wrong, he would have said that. You know, there is no truth to this. But what I think is happening is that, the government is really trying to argue its semantics here. They're essentially complaining that we're missing a comma at the bottom of paragraph 8. They're trying to find something small to deny the entirety of the story. And the reason for that is that the last time in October 22, when a similar operation occurred, the government received a huge amount of blowback. We're talking about in, for example, Western Sydney, where a lot of these people were repatriated. It was described as a dumping ground, but the fact of the matter is state and federal agencies are preparing for ISIS brides stranded in northern Syria to be returned home before Christmas.
We've seen this movie before, haven't we?
I think it's appalling that Australians have gone and fought against our values and our way of life and peace-loving countries of the world in joining the Daesh fight. I think it's even more despicable that they put their children in the middle of it.
In 2019, the first cohort of ISIS families came home. In 2022, another group. But every time, the federal politicians are caught between their desire to resolve a very difficult issue. Countries like Syria don't want these people on their hands anymore. They're getting pressure from the humanitarian organisations that run these camps saying, you have a responsibility, these people are Australian passport holders. And yet the government doesn't want to be blamed if ultimately these families back here in Australia find themselves caught up in a terror event. Let's say 15 years into the future, one of these children grows up and is arrested and accused of plotting a terror attack because they were radicalised as a child. That's the nightmare scenario for the government, isn't it?
Well, that's right. There are very dangerous people who are radicalised in these camps. Now, the people that are coming back to Australia are very young, very easily influenced. These people returning are going to have to be very carefully managed. There's specific de-radicalisation programs that are run by the state governments. They're in place to keep us safe and to ensure the people that are more influenced by some of the more radical elements of Islam are not a danger to our society.
Yeah, it's like witness protection on steroids, isn't it? On one hand, there has to be privacy for these people, new identities. They have to be able to explain to their new neighbours where they've been for the past decade. And then also there has to be high levels of help and support to help kids reintegrate to school, to help women find their way back in society, probably now as widows. Let's talk about the details of some of these families. It's been reported that one of the ISIS brides in this cohort, and of course we haven't got this confirmed because there's so much secrecy about it, is a Sydney woman called Nesreen Zahab, who kind of tricked her family and escaped from a family holiday in Lebanon, went to the war zone, married an Australian man who was fighting with Islamic State. He's now dead. She's in a refugee camp with her child and her family wants her to be able to come home. She did make a choice to go to this place. She's now in this awful situation. it's a hard one for policymakers.
It absolutely is, but I think what we have to do is, and as absurd as it might sound, is really try and put ourselves in the position of a 21-year-old who's possibly very easily influenced. And, you know, sitting here as a 30-year-old male, you do think, you know, how on earth does that happen? But you also think back at some of the things that you did at 21. Sure, I didn't head over to Syria and get married to someone, but what if that was your sister? What if that had just gone off and made that horrific choice? A lot of people think that, you know, you make your bed, you lie in it. But at the end of the day, she's Australian and so is her child. And like Scott Morrison said in 2019, children shouldn't be punished for the sins of their parents. We're talking about 5-year-old children who couldn't say to their parents, I don't want to go here, or I didn't want to be born here. And that's, I think, for me, is the saddest part of this story.
So then another twist when a senior New South Wales police officer, Dave Hudson, appeared before New South Wales Parliament's budget estimates, where he's required to answer any questions that are put to him. He was asked kind of as a matter of fact what role the New South Wales police would have in repatriating this group of people. And he started talking about it as though it was an accepted fact that this was happening.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. We are still working through that issue with the Commonwealth. If the AFP don't play as significant a role as they have previously, we will. We'll have to work that out, which we've got some meetings next week in Canberra, aligned with the Australian-New Zealand Counter-Terrorism Committee meeting, where I'll try and explore that further. Obviously, New South Wales Government have a huge role with justice and health and education and everyone else in the reintegration of these individuals back into New South Wales society, as we have done previously.
That must have given you some comfort, Liam, after the Prime Minister had denied your story.
Yes and no. I mean, I was pretty comfortable with the story in the first place. And, you know, this is something that multiple agencies have been dealing with quite closely in the last week. Dave Hudson is a very matter-of-fact type of guy. He was just sitting there and he answered the question. He's not a politician. He wasn't trying to skirt around the answer. This is business as usual for the New South Wales Police, and they are very good at keeping very close eye on anyone that possibly might be exposed to violent extremism.
Can the Prime Minister explain this contradiction?
Thank you. There is no contradiction between my answer yesterday was absolutely correct.
Prime Minister, are you calling the New South Wales Police Deputy Commissioner David Hudson a liar?
That is an outrageous suggestion. I confirm that the Australian Government is not providing assistance to this cohort.
Coming up, the horrific appeal of ISIS for some foreign fighters and whether things should be different for the women and children. It's easy to forget how awful ISIS was and how scary. I think we remember those images of journalists being burnt alive in cages, of people being pushed off buildings. And one of the scary things about Australians who went to fight with ISIS was that they were radicalised, often on social media, by these kinds of videos, by absolutely horrendous things happening. But I think the reality when they got there, for particularly the women and children who they took with them, was that ISIS was a horrendously misogynistic and dangerous organisation. Life was hell. They never achieved the caliphate that they were seeking to establish. They've lived through an awful period of time. This is a very different conversation, isn't it, to the one we'd be having if we were talking about repatriating men who had been fighters.
Yes, that's right. You bring up an interesting point there. A couple of years ago, spent a fair bit of time with a fellow named Nawroz Amin, and he spent 5 years in jail after pleading guilty to preparing for a terror attack in his parents' homeland of Bangladesh. I think is an example of someone who has been released from prison and has been able to successfully reintegrate himself into society. He's made some new friends. He's got himself a labouring job. This was, about 2 years ago when I spoke to him. Advocates would say that we have a duty to these women and children. If the men are able to be reintegrated into society, then why can't these women and children who, in often cases, have been forced to the Middle East?
Liam Mendez is a journalist with The Australian. You can read his series of exclusives right now at theaustralian.com.au.